Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
No,
around the body. Jazz up!
He's off from inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal from inside the centre. Fuck! I can't believe it.
Good time of day, everyone. Welcome to episode 235 of Americans Watching the Footy as we recap round 7, the Anzac appeal round. I am Benjamin Castle in San Diego, and I'm joined, virtually anyway, by my brother Ethan.
Yes, I am in South San Francisco as usual. Brian Harambe, the executive producer, is right here. Can you make that noise again, Brian? A few minutes ago, he stretched out and yawned and made this squeak, and it was the funniest sound ever.
I would say Ryan doesn't do requests, but honestly, he kind of does when you request very certain things. What I'll say is this: I was much less enthused by the content of this round than the previous one. And honestly, the previous just about any of them so far this year. Sunday especially soured me.
Not that the games themselves weren't compelling in a lot of cases, but more the outcomes.
The ways in which the games were compelling were not things I wanted. At least the round started decently well. You want to go back to Thursday?
Yeah. Melbourne 12-11-83 defeated Richmond 9-9-63 in front of, I believe it was, a little under 72,000.
Not bad considering the bottom 6 matchup.
And a 6-goal-to-1 third quarter was what really did it. Melbourne led by 4 at half despite getting smashed on clearances, and then turned that around in the third quarter, basically evened it up. And considering that they were better in just about every other area, it worked out really well. Max Gawn, one of his best games, and against good competition in Toby Nankervis. I don't think the numbers quite do it justice, with the 34 hitouts, 25 disposals, 12 score involvements, 9 marks, 5 of which were contested, 6 clearances and 6 intercepts. Basically, you couldn't kick it by him, and he got a bunch of hitouts and started things off from ruck contests.
Third quarter, easily his best, easily Melbourne's best. In that same quarter, Jake Bowie and Clayton Oliver with 13 each. You saw Jack Viney setting the tone for pressure with tackles in that quarter and all game. Tom Sparrow doing the same. Also, just like in round 6, Keziah Pickett started the second half at deep forward, and that worked. He got a goal right away, and he kept just moving around the forward 2/3 of the field really smartly. Another one of those game changers. I also like, again, that Kazi Pickett and Cade Chandler can coexist. I've been on this for how many years now? And we haven't seen it enough. Pickett obviously is the flashier player, but Chandler also has good running ability, and his pressure in the forward 50 showed up on a couple key occasions. So overall, pleased with how Melbourne managed to really secure this game, and that's 2 in a row for them.
I thought Chandler also just made a bunch of really high effort plays, but the one who impressed me the most beyond Gone had to be Jake Bowie. The way he's evolved, and I've talked about this before, even as the D's had started 0-5, he was a positive, and one of the few players who I felt better about after a few weeks than I did coming into the season. But his role kind of sweeping around the back, not letting play get further, starting things off with handballs or kicks, good at both. But when I just picture him, I picture him picking a ball up at ground level and then handballing it to someone already in motion.
It's a role that Christian Salem had been more accustomed to playing in the past. And while Salem's still in the picture, Bowie is the one who's really taken control there. And he's been tasked with a lot early in the season in games without Stephen May and or Jake Lever. Obviously, May was back for this one, had an injury concern, but came back from that and still got some really strong intercept marks.
Went a whole game without complaining about an obviously correct call, from what I could tell.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. But you were talking also about how Melbourne created so much from clearance. 4 of their 6 goals in the third quarter were from clearance. And then in the fourth quarter, it was a very, very Melbourne fourth quarter, a focus on ball control, more uncontested marks around the back to take time. No really defining dagger moment. They just kind of bled things out, digging deeper just to throw it away.
Yeah, the third quarter was kind of the dagger. Once Petrarca scored from 51 to put him up by 36, you felt like that was really it. Even if, and maybe you had felt it already.
Maybe, honestly, Jonty Fall missing at the 3/4 time siren just confirmed, oh yeah, Richmond aren't going to be mounting any sort of comeback. Now, Fall definitely has been better these past couple weeks. I'll give him that. The Richmond player I was most disappointed by was sadly Morris Rioli Jr.
He has these super high impact flashes, but it's like you never see it over a full game.
And then in this one, it was multiple bad moments in terms of a high fend off a Richmond kick in, dropping a mark in lights. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets dropped.
I hope not, because I would love to see him get more stable time and a chance to really show his upside, but I understand that there's some frustration. I appreciate that people in the footy media sphere are not screaming, oh, the D's are back, oh my God, considering they have a half decent win over Freo and now beat one of the bottom teams in Richmond.
And if they win next week, it won't be anything special either.
They went out to Perth and lost last year.
A win against the Eagles is not special.
I liked when Dane Swan said beating the Eagles should only be worth 3 points.
Maybe a bonus point if you get to 70-point margin or something.
Start with 2 points if you beat them at home, 3 if you beat them in Perth, and then add on bonus points for margin.
A very rugby idea here, and I honestly am not complaining. You could honestly do a similar thing for North.
Let's not act like this was, like a super high level game. There were some stretches in the first quarter that were fun, bad footy where it was just like super chaotic and fast paced and like turnover after turnover, but the ball moving up and down the ground. It didn't work really well for either team to just bomb it into the forward 50, and both still did some of that. Even Melbourne, with their smaller forward structure, still is trying to do that more than they should. And neither team had great success with that. And that's in part because of who's back there, most notably Nick Lostone, who wasn't as great as he was the week before.
Kind of hard for him to be, but still, we gave him our polished turd vote. Though Tom Lynch definitely did put up a good fight, ended up 3-3 from 13 with 7 marks. He wasn't bitching about things either, surprisingly, but was still trying to spark things for Richmond, both in play and post play as well.
I'm not guaranteeing Melbourne's going to go and beat the Eagles this coming week, but I like their chances a lot more than I did a couple weeks ago. I would still definitely consider them the favorites, but they're going to have to beat, do something else impressive for me to really take them seriously. And there are opportunities with Hawthorn and a trip to Brisbane and a home game against the Swans. But I'm just assuming they don't go on a crazy run, which I don't think most people are expecting. It's just nice that they're competitive.
And then Richmond plays West Coast in round 9. And then North in round 10. They got a very winnable stretch coming up here. After Hawthorn, they host West Coast, host North. I believe those are both at the G.
Richmond Hawthorn games might be visually my least favorite.
Ooh, good point. But yeah, for Richmond, this was the first of 5 straight games for them at the G, ending with Dreamtime in round 11, which is also eminently winnable. Not saying they will, just that, big occasions can often bring closer games, and I can see good paths forward for Richmond. And with Essendon on the brain, we turn to Anzac Day in front of more than 92,000 despite the rain. Collingwood 16-11-107 defeated Essendon 10-6-66. It was an 8-point game at halftime. Essendon went on a run, spanning halftime, scoring, I believe, 6 of 7 goals before Collingwood said, fuck that, we're the way better team. Jamie Elliott finished with 5 goals, the third of which was his 300th. The Anzac medal went to Steele Sidebottom because 15 clearances can do that. Although I gotta say, he wasn't as efficient, and I don't think his wins directly led to as much. He was definitely the main force, though, in the middle.
So the way I always look at that, you start in the middle evaluating things, but you got to ask, like, where did they win this game? And I didn't necessarily think Collingwood won it because of clearance dominance. And then you look at the underlying numbers, the fact that Sidebottom was below 50% disposal efficiency. And despite all those clearances, only 3 score involvements and 5 intercepts, which tells you that, yes, he was good at his role, but his role wasn't so much what keyed them to winning this game. I think it was just they were a lot cleaner and better throughout. In a lot of games, I haven't been that high on Josh Dacos, and I thought he was actually really good in this game, kind of waiting just outside of the physical contests and then kind of helping to stretch the field.
Whereas Nick, who, yes, captained Collingwood in this game, their youngest captain for a game in, I believe it was 57 years. While Nick is often, in the physical contest or one of the first guys off it, Josh is kind of in that next shell outward. If you're kind of looking at footy contest like a Bohr model. Let's see who gets that reference and all.
I also thought Jeremy Howe was outstanding at 12 intercept.
A lot of license for Howe to run. That's been a more common theme I've seen. Even with Darcy Moore out, they let Howe play a lot of the sweeper role and let Premiership defender Billy Frampton just be that main one-on-one guy in the back. And that worked quite well.
He got 1 coach's vote. That's it? The fuck? That's a massive oversight.
Gotta say, even in the rain, I was impressed by Collingwood's cleanliness, and from the back, it was definitely Josh Dacos and Jeremy Howe there. Bobby Hill definitely sparked some things in the second half. Just good instincts from the smalls on Collingwood in general. Elliott, Hill, McCreary honestly doesn't seem that small to me, but he plays like one. And that was big in Collingwood being able to respond after Essendon kept their run going. Sam Dern was involved well in their midfield. Nate Caddy got involved much more on either side of halftime too. And then Collingwood responded, and right before the rain came in too. Oh, and then the run just continued. The cleanliness for Collingwood, especially once the rain came in, was visible in terms of seeing the shorter options well. They obviously can run, but they were willing to vary their pace a bit. Both Dacos brothers did that well. I noted time and again, just Nick seeing the short options better than just about anybody. And then Scott Pendlebury also definitely stepped up in terms of midfield play in the third quarter as well. I believe he got to double-digit disposals then too.
Ned Long was also one who got better as the game went on, someone who just continues to really impress me this year.
Essendon did win clearances early in the fourth quarter, but I thought they needed to be more aggressive, especially from defense. And they really didn't do enough to try and actually force themselves through the middle. I know Collingwood for the past now 3 weeks has done a great job at clogging the corner, but you've got to confront them there at some point. If it works, then you're giving them a lot of problems. If not, it's more than an at least you tried cake. It's like, yeah, you're actually like trying to counter a thing that the league has honestly taken as a given.
Other highlight of this game was finally our first Magpie Jesus sighting of the year.
Yes, Mark was there. I forget at what point he showed up. I think it was toward the end.
It was after Elliott's 5th goal.
Oh yeah, that was, final 5 minutes of clock time there. I was at that point watching with my housemate Dana, who was just very willing to watch any sort of sports with me. We've been watching a bunch of playoff hockey and some close playoff basketball, but it was footy this time, and it was her first time watching Collingwood. So that was interesting. But yes, I jumped up when I saw Magpie Jesus. I don't know if anybody else calls him back but us.
I don't know, but, posted the photo of him waving his flag with, he is risen. And,
it's fitting that it happened in Collingwood's first game after Easter. Combine that with the Bont rising and also healing the sick on Easter Sunday himself. And I don't know, maybe this league is watched over in some ways. We'll see if the conclave might change things.
Darcy Cameron definitely outplayed Todd Goldstein, but I'm glad Todd Goldstein was out there. I still maintain that, when he got the all-time hit-out record, it should have been celebrated much more, Pendlebury's disposal record.
Which I believe happened in Anzac Day last year.
You know what I would have done for both of those records, right?
Invaded the Oval?
No. giving him a laminated certificate like the referee gave to Drew Brees when he threw that touchdown.
Oh, okay.
It was like a kid getting recognized for perfect attendance at the end of the school year. It was so dorky and so funny.
I'm thinking about the monthly awards assemblies at my student teaching site.
Essendon positives that I had written down. Yeah, Sam Durham had that flash. Zach Reed was really good. He actually got one coach's vote as well. He is our polished turd, right?
Yeah, after having been worst on round earlier this year.
I thought Ben Mackay was actually decent. You would joke, in his 100th game, he would give up 100 points. But he was not bad. You know who was?
Jackson Pryor.
Yeah, I haven't watched enough of the VFL to tell you if Lewis Hayes is ready. But if he is, that should be his spot.
A couple of kicks were issues from him. There was an intercept mark that led to a goal as part of that third quarter run for Collingwood. Caught off guard in terms of marking contests and leads multiple times. I'm sorry, he's just not an AFL caliber defender, and it is broken, so fix it, Brad Scott.
This was the first time in his brief appearances this year that Will Setterfield was quieted, which makes sense because, he was playing against better competition.
We were trying to figure out who would be the best candidate to tag on that Essendon team, and I guess it was him. I just don't like the idea.
I still would have done it. My overall conclusion with Collingwood right now is so long as their older guys keep playing like this, they're pretty terrifying.
Top of the ladder at the end of April is saying something there. And also, I want to note, despite the conditions, Beat Gordon on Twitter did point this out. It was 27 scoring shots and 107 total points. Totals they only passed 4 times for scoring shots and twice for points last year. Collingwood have already hit the triple digits 3 times in their first 7 games. So offensive production, not an issue for them. Even with Dan McStay straining his MCL in this game, this might actually be a good time to bring back Mason Cox in terms of letting Darcy Cameron be even more versatile or adding some tall interference in packs.
Sounds likely. I know he was playing forward in the VFL. 2 goals from 11 disposals. He also had 19 hitouts. Charlie West had 3 goals.
Okay, who the hell was actually in ruck for Essendon? I guess it would have had to have been Vigo Vizentini.
Yeah, and then for Collingwood, it was a split between Cox and Oscar Steen.
Vigo Vizentini, what an elite name.
My favorite name now, though?
Jonty Fall's a pretty good one.
This is not a footy name. It's also an Italian name.
Oh, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Pier Battista Pizzaballa.
Yes. One of my friends shared today, if he becomes the Pope, he needs to take on the name Pope John, because then he'd be Papa John.
In the Len Hall Tribute game, Fremantle 12-13-85 defeated Adelaide 9-13-67. This was the first of the games this round where we really saw how fucked the umpiring could be, but in all the games where the umpiring really did seem fucked, we don't see any results having changed because of it. A 6-2 first quarter for Fremantle set the tone, and even though they were inaccurate and goalless in the last, the margin was already far too much.
Yeah, so there were some pretty ridiculous calls in Frio's favor and just a ton of unnecessary whistles altogether. It felt like defenders were being treated like defensive backs in the NFL, where you basically just can't make any contact. And Marlon Humphreys pointed out on his show, which is a very good listen if you like the NFL, by the way. It's called Punchline Pod. He's pointed out that wide receivers can get away with a lot of the exact same contact that DBs can't. And I think you can kind of apply the same here. And more of those calls went in Frio's favor. There were how many combined free kicks in the first half? It was a lot.
What's disappointing is we can't break up team stats by quarter on any of the pages for the AFL website or app. I would love for that to happen because you can break up individual stats by quarter on the app only.
That feels like the sort of thing that Gil McLaughlin would have actually been super responsive on. And I don't know if Andrew Dillon is anywhere near as connected or in touch. The more I think about it so far, I think Gil was actually a really good CEO. But yeah, the 32 stood out because I thought back to this 2022 game in Tasmania between the Hawks and Lions, where they combined for 63 free kicks. So they were on pace to exceed that. Now, it did end up better in the second half. And Frio mostly just won this game because they had the better midfield, as most teams do against the Crows. And they actually had some really good defensive performances from Brennan Cox and Luke Ryan. And like Luke Ryan wasn't just in terms of ball movement or setting up attacks. It was in like actual one-on-one defending. Same for Brennan Cox, who, a week earlier had gotten beaten a bunch of times, not in one-on-one contests, but like on that first step, so he couldn't even get there. Because when he's challenged one-on-one contests, he's been really good. And in this game, he was able to do that. Ryan did as well, and they were able to largely quiet, the Walker-Philthorpe combination.
And then Philthorpe apparently was also playing through a dislocated finger.
Obviously, no Darcy Fogarty makes a difference as well. But you did get Josh Rochelle back. And yeah, the Dockers were definitely the better team in this game. I mean, the lead was 36 at one point in the second quarter.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just looking up some stats, looking for like all-time highs for free kicks. And apparently, if we thought umpires were policing things too tightly for this game, we should have been watching footy in the 70s.
I mean, this was also when games were crazy high scoring, right?
No, in a 63-51 game in 1977 at Windy Hill, there were a combined 132 free kicks.
That sounds terrible.
It must have been raining. We had a new medal for this game. I love this. The Arthur Leggett Medal, named after Western Australia's last surviving prisoner of war from World War II. He had died just this past month, and it was won unanimously by Andrew Brayshaw, who not only helped generate scores, but helped stop other passages, 9 scored involvements, but also 8 intercepts in a 37 disposal effort. This was one of those number 8 is absolutely everywhere games. And when there's so much attention on Caleb Sarong, sometimes you can kind of forget, oh yeah, Andrew Brayshaw can still be in that elite category too. And it was just a nice reminder of how well that duo can click, because Sarong still had his 32 and 19 contested, 10 clearances and 15 ground ball gets. But I saw Brayshaw as the chief winner for this game for Fremantle. Hayden Young and Shea Bolton each had their good stretches too. I love what Bolton can provide going into the midfield as well. You think kind of similar things about a potential future Docker in Causey Pickett, where they can split the time really anywhere in the forward 2/3 so effectively. And then best game of the year with ease for Matt Johnson, 27 disposals and also 8 marks. A pretty efficient showing for a younger midfielder who doesn't get nearly as much buzz. Just developing into a very nice supporting cast type player.
Yeah, Sarong, despite the numbers, it was a lot of stuff right off of stoppage, and his impact didn't quite go off and beyond that. Whereas Brayshaw was more visible on different spots, and I think it's fair to say that Brayshaw, throughout the course of the game, got better as well. Johnson was kind of fast, a little frantic, but in an efficient way. And I also really like Corey Wagner in this game. Numbers weren't anything special, but I thought he was just on a per touch basis, super high quality. And I think I might be able to tell him apart from Carl Warner without having to check the roster every time now.
What number does Corey Wagner wear?
34.
Good. And Carl Warner?
23.
You're looking, aren't you?
No, I'm not. But I know that Warner has the shorter hair and Wagner has the longer hair.
And a beard.
Yes. And it's Wagner can actually play in the midfield, whereas Warner's more defensive.
Yeah, he can push up. You can have him be just in back of the center square, for example, on bounces. Now your next task is to remember which Bergman brother is which.
That one's actually I'm usually pretty good at. Miles is at Port, Miller's at North.
And yet time and again, you won't know this because I edited it out, but Ethan often says Miller in place of Miles' name at first.
Other quick notes, Sean Darcy definitely better. Over a third of his hitouts were to advantage.
I mean, this was a game with 2 much more very direct, just hit ball rucks. I mean, good luck to anybody against Max Gawn, but this was also, I think, a poor showing from Riley O'Brien.
He's caught some criticism from Crows fans this year, and you wonder if maybe he's someone who the axe could swing on at some point.
If so, then I guess it would be their supplemental pickup in Lachlan McAndrew, the former Swan, whom I'm definitely interested in getting a shot in these past couple games where things haven't been clicking for Adelaide. It's made me want to see just what adjustments can Matthew Mix effectively make. 1 game, don't overreact. 2, yeah, you can start to worry a bit, especially when Freo hadn't been finding their form in a lot of ways either. You said that most teams would have a midfield that's better than Adelaide's. I'd agree, especially on the note that like they'd have more of those grade A top tier type midfielders, whereas Adelaide has a lot of like B grade guys who can get it done by committee, but have trouble in those direct one-on-one battles.
Also, obviously, you'd be better off with Luke Jackson, but Oscar McDonald did a really good job in the backup ruck role. Ended up with 3 assists, 2 goals, and just kind of as that extra tall in contests and relieving Darcy, usually in like the forward 50. I thought he was really good at what he was being asked to do. And then I thought strategically, Freo did a really good job avoiding Nick Murray, who, like, I know Josh Worrell got some credit in the coaches' votes, but the key to beating the Crows' defense largely is just making sure, I guess, that Nick Murray doesn't take over and shut your guy down. And they did a good job just making sure that he wasn't a key factor in the equation. This is 3 losses out of 4 now for the Crows, right?
It is 3 out of 4. The 1-point loss at the Suns, getting up 119 to Geelong. And then this one after the just really disappointing game on all fronts the week before. It has not been a fun April for the Adelaide Football Club. They did get Joshua Shelley back in this game, so that's a plus. I gotta say, and though Jordan Dawson ranked highly and got his 21 disposals and 7 tackles, I wasn't a huge fan of his game either.
8 turnovers, and his kicking efficiency has just been really poor the last few weeks. And he's a guy that you think of as stretching the field, and he really didn't do much of that. He finished under 43% disposal efficiency for the game, and only 5 of those 21 were contested. So still offering fantasy value, but not, like actually helping your team win value, which I would argue is just slightly more significant.
In terms of guys stretching the field, you think about Jordan Clark doing that for Freo with his 27.
I think of Clark doing it with more run and carry than with just the long kick.
Exactly, but Dawson's running is decent as well, so maybe you need to see him play a bit more like the Jordan he saw in purple this week. And I believe Jordan Clark got a couple votes for Spud's Golden Fist this week.
Matt Crouch got some criticism. I thought he was okay, just not as good as they needed like him or Jake Saligo to be. Mark Keane had a really rough time defending. It was definitely the quietest game Ben Keys had this year. And if we're looking at immediate changes, Zach Taylor, after a good sub performance a couple weeks ago, and he's been in the main team the last 2 weeks, has not been great. And Wayne Miller really struggled. I would love to see Lachlan Scholl get back in. I just think he's a way better player than a lot of people realize, and a pretty accurate kick that could help compensate in some of the areas where Dawson struggled. And then big picture stuff, talking about the umpiring earlier, and I'll just come back to that. They were calling so much stuff on Riley O'Brien in ruck contests that was not there at all. He got outplayed by Darcy, but it was compounded by some really bad calls. And then in the third quarter, the Crows wasted chances both with their set shots as they kicked 0-4 for the quarter, and just inability to link up and even get some of the chances they needed in the forward 50. So there were opportunities for them to get back in this game, and they simply did not take them.
And I don't think it's going to get more fun for the Crows given their upcoming schedule. Before their bye, the Blues come to town next week. Then they've got Port's home showdown before they go to Collingwood. They ought to get a reprieve hosting West Coast. Ought to, before going to the Swans and then hosting the Lions and going back to Melbourne to play the Hawks before the bye.
St. Kilda 11-7-73, defeated by Brisbane 17-16-118. Couple of things about this game. The thing that really dictated this game, and the thing that I may remember most. What do you want me to go to first? The most memorable or the most important?
Let's go most important. Are we just going to say Lachie Neale?
Lachie Neale, and specifically the Saints' decision not to tag him and to tag Hugh McCluggage instead. And by all means, Hugh McCluggage has been great so far this year. Over the first quarter of the season, you could make a very real argument that the best midfielders that have been out there like every game, so kind of exclude Bond from this, would be Hugh McCluggage and George Hewitt.
Yes, thank you for mentioning Hewitt. I mean, we'll be talking about him more later, obviously. But this is Lachie Neal you're talking about.
We ain't talking about this or this. We're talking about this.
And whereas McCluggage has been winning more clearances, he's also often not the first guy to get to things. And I think Windhager has done a job against Neal before. It was something different. I understood the intention from Ross Lyon, but man, it did not work. I am sorry.
Final score does not tell how lopsided this was. First off, the Saints went almost the whole first quarter before they scored. This was, I guess the first thing is just the first 10 minutes of this were a really hard watch. Aside from Mitch Owens taking the non-mark of the year.
It was a kick that he managed to catch, and he had a hanger on Darcy Gardner for it. Problem was, it was touched off Rowan Marshall's boot. And this was not a great game for a couple guys involved in that play. Firstly, Darcy Gardner was a late in for Jack Payne, and that is definitely a downgrade. If Payne is back from his illness next week, that's going to be an easy swap out there. And then Marshall, we know him as that yeet ruck, and it definitely cost him a couple times. I noted there was one where he tried to kick a ball back toward his own goal. It was actually right after that when Lachie Neal kicked the very first goal of the game.
Yeah, so the only goal until very late in the first quarter was off of Rowan Marshall for some reason deciding off of a ruck contest to just kick it back to his own goal. The Lions started off 1-5. The first quarter was really bad, and then they got out of their own way, got up by 30. The lead was 38 at the end of the third. And yeah, this was not close. So while non-mark of the year was fun, it was not the thing that I'm going to remember most from this game.
What are you going to remember most then?
Zane Dorco.
I mean, this is something that's clearly happened before, but I guess we hadn't been aware of it.
I forget which broadcaster called him Zane Dorco, and it was really funny, and I would like that to be a common thing, whether that be his evil twin or just, maybe he gets suspended and then, it's just him with a fake mustache. Oh no, I'm Dane Zorko, kind of like Guy Incognito or something, or Mr. Snrub.
What I'm going to remember from this game is the Lions wearing maroon at Marvel. That hasn't happened in a hot minute. In fact, I went back and did the research on this. It was their first game wearing maroon at Marvel since 2018, if you count a Sir Doug Nicholls jumper. If you're talking about their standard maroon, that went back to 2017 when they lost to the Bulldogs in Bob Murphy's 300th. And you have to go back to 2013 for Brisbane's last win wearing their regular maroon jumpers. A game in which Dane Zorko kicked the go-ahead goal.
Now, they wore these because St. Kilda had what I thought were probably the best of the Anzac round jumpers, except for one thing. I loved the white with the black cross. What I didn't love was basically the giant stripe on the back, on the lower back, because of their ad for a Chinese car, first off. Why the hell are Chinese companies even getting to advertise here? That's a whole different discussion.
I mean, remember, the Saints have had a strong connection with China. Think back to the great success of the Shanghai games.
But just that it was if this was just a black ad on a white background, it would look so much better. Kind of like how sometimes that Bank West ad is really loud on Frio's jersey. Same deal here. The positives for the Saints are basically just that, and that Jack Higgins was pretty good and is in the Coleman race so far with a bunch of much taller people. And then Mitch Owens, even though he didn't kick one himself, he set some stuff up. And I like Max Hall. I've been pretty genuinely positive about Max Hall all year, but this once again reinforced. When the Saints are bad, it's really bad. Against GWS, it wasn't that awful, but you look at the Crows game and you look at the Dogs game last week, and now you look at this one. The bad for this team is really, really bad.
Well, speed is key for them, obviously, and they showed that when they started the second half with some center clearance wins. Just once again, though, when the Saints keep having to defend, they get all their numbers back there. don't have that set up down the line to accelerate things, to get those overlaps as well. And that's just the start of their problems. They also just keep having games where they fade away in the second half in general. Oh yeah, I just remembered the other thing I'll remember from this game. Eric Hipwood had 3 goals on his right foot, 3 of his 4. That's honestly insane. There was a tough snap for one of them as well. Also, Zach Bailey had a couple really bad early kicks and one behind of the week nomination, but otherwise, he was, I think, one of the best in this game. Super satisfying because we always know what Bailey can do. It's a matter of whether he does it week in and week out, and he's been a bit more consistent as of late. Kicked 3-2 from 24 in this one.
What's not so great is that Kyle Lohman's cursed, and until further notice, Charlie Cameron might be broken. Lohman hurt, what was it, his shoulder this time? Yeah. And played through it for a while and then got subbed out. I guess we're calling it a medical sub.
Cameron's compass is just off for some reason, and it depresses me.
I was having this discussion even on like Geelong's post-game live last night with the Hoops crew. It came up, and I'll reference why much, much later. But yeah, 0-4 from 12 disposals for one of the most like fun and universally liked people in the sport. I hope he gets things right, and I hope he does it soon because, yeah, I like him. We all do. Darcy Wilmot, I thought was not just volume. I thought there was substance to how he played. He had 9 intercepts. And Jared Berry, only 19 disposals, but pretty high quality per touch. St. Kilda, I normally believe that there was a method to everything Ross Lyon is doing, but subbing out Hugo Garcia mid-second quarter when there were a bunch of guys who were way less effective that you could have taken out, whether that be Isaac Keeler, who really isn't latching on as that second ruck that I think they had envisioned, or Lance Collard, maybe Jimmy Webster, or even Cooper Sharman.
You see, the difficulty there that I will say is that they still wanted to go like for like, I think. And so you're looking for a midfield to take out to bring in Zach Jones, who, had a decent enough impact with 18 disposals. But I just think Hugo was really hard done by Ross in this one. I hope he isn't fazed by it that much. And there's a question about if that's how you treat a younger player as well, which I'm not going to buy that side of it. Oh, you can't treat a younger guy this way compared to a vet.
I love pulling the trigger on the sub early when things are going poorly. I don't think taking out a guy who had 14 pressure acts in a quarter and a half was the right way to do it. Mason Wood, who I normally really liked, was very quiet. You could have done, I would have felt more comfortable doing like that or Dougal Howard. And
I would have felt more comfortable getting Wood more into the middle and trying to swing some magnets otherwise, whether that was, getting Caminiti forward instead to try and change things. That ended up happening late, and he got a goal there. But other things could have been done rather than using the sub so quickly. And then didn't they also need the sub when Wood got hurt?
Yeah, he had a head clash, and that probably takes him out this coming week as well.
There was also the question, raised in this game, if somebody's tactically subbed out and then there's a medical thing like a concussion, should they be allowed to bring that sub back in? No. I agree. You should not. You made your bed. Now lie in it.
I think it's a fun strategic element to have to deal with. Like, I think back to the loss to Port last year where Reece Stanley got yanked in the middle of the second quarter, and it was the correct move. And I totally get why coaches wait to pull the trigger, but I think that the sub rule as it currently stands does not need changing.
Port Adelaide, 14-13-97, defeating North Melbourne 13-10-88. This is another one where the score does not reflect the level of play. North got away with a lot and shouldn't have, and there is a reason why Port fans were booing, honestly, more than they were cheering at the final siren. You know what is going to be Port fans, by the way, to do this at all.
It could have been Crows fans, too. It was definitely a South Australian team, but this was actually, despite some pretty lousy umpiring, like a super quick 50 on Aliir for knocking a ball out after a mark, back-to-back 50s in the third to get North within a goal where maybe it was something for not standing a mark. We don't really know. Just a few pretty interesting calls. Free kicks ended up 26-20 in North's favor, and free kick count by itself doesn't tell the whole story, but even with some poor umpiring, the better team won, and it was a really fun and interesting game, which was dictated by clearance runs, like one team getting a bunch of clearances in a row, each team having their stretches with that, and as everyone expected, Port winning because Mitch Georgiadis and Ollie Lord were dominant and kicked a bunch of goals, and Nick Larkey missed a bunch of them.
He was truly hexed this game. There were multiple occasions where the commentator's curse came into play. Jason Dunstall had one early on. There was another one from Dwayne Russell. It happened again pretty late. Just stop doing it, guys. Work.
I mean, if there's anyone who's like unjinxable, it would be him. Or maybe Jack Gunston from the pocket.
No one is immune.
But it was 1-2, and he missed how many? And he missed how many completely? At least 2, maybe a third. Big picture, like outside of the first quarter, North actually played pretty well. They kept me compelled, which they hadn't for a couple weeks.
After the first quarter, it was no more than, it was only a 2-goal game halftime. It was a 13-point game at 3-quarter time. They stayed in it the whole way, whether you like it or not, whether they were helped to get that or not.
No, they played a good competitive game once their defense got into shape, and there were a bunch of changes, and it took guys playing really their first AFL game this year some time to get comfortable, whether that be Jackson Archer, or maybe he had played like one before. One of him or Callan Dawson played one before, and one hadn't been in a game. And getting both of those in, it took a little time. Took some time for like Riley Hardiman to get into things. He was better. I really like Colby McKercher, even in a lower volume game. And this is funny because Luke Davies-Uniacke, numbers-wise, was really good. I didn't think he was all that important. The coaches' votes and the stat sheet loved Tristan Jerry, but I didn't think he was all that impactful. I thought it was, some George Wardlaw, including one really nice goal. Paul Curtis, who we'll talk about more later. And just like, this looked like a team with far fewer guys that should not be playing an AFL game. Although, shouts out to Darcy Tucker for, there's no Tony Snell award, but he was kind of the Tony Snell.
Did he register anything fantasy-wise, Tucker? 3 tackles. Okay, so he wasn't like a complete zero. This wasn't a trillion game.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Club Trillion is the thing started by, I think it was a former Ohio State walk-on, Mark Titus. And basically, your stat line, if you play 1 minute and don't do anything, is a 1, and however many zeros makes a trillion.
Is 12.
That's what I thought. I thought it was 12. Darcy Tucker didn't get that, but
no disposals, no marks or anything of the sort for Tucker. Again, the 3 tackles were what he did before he was subbed out in the fourth quarter, having been on the ground for about 98 minutes of action. He was set up to be a defensive half forward against Connor Rosie, and that didn't work. You got to have a player of higher caliber to go up against Rosie if you have him in a constant one-on-one at all. And I'm not sure if that's really the right move, but Rosie at halfback has been brilliant. It allows him to run and control the game from further back, see a greater part of the oval. And considering also the depth that this team has in the middle with Horn Francis and Drew and of course Butters being back is what really unlocked everything. And it's funny as well seeing Butters being one of the ones to calm down to Horn Francis, but that kind of worked there too. You knew Horn Francis was going to get heated in this game. It's against North. Oh, by the way, AFL, fuck you for not scheduling any North versus Port games in Victoria since the trade. The horny one, blessed be he.
Here he is again, the horny one.
Started the game really hot, faded as it went on, and then got involved in one of the most visible umpiring things. Jai Simpkins shoved him in the back pretty good, and then Horn Francis ended up taking him to the ground, and you're going to give up a downfield free for that every time. Now, Simpkin absolutely should have gotten something there for being the one to initiate it, but at the same time, umpires are going to see someone getting just straight up tackled. And I fully understand how that was adjudicated the way it was, even though it was not just a little bump from Simpkin. He I don't know what if anyone was fined or anything out of this, but if you're going to fine Horn Francis, you got to fine Simpkin too. Let's stay on the umpiring topic real quick and talk about Paul Curtis.
Well, this is less umpiring and more match review because there's no option other than 0 games or 3 games.
And that's the sort of thing that could be fixed overnight.
They won't fix it overnight because of the precedent of things happening in season. And I honestly would be opposed to things being fixed in season.
No, this is such an obvious fix that would do far more good than harm.
If it's not fixed by the start of 2026, we march on Marvel Stadium. Be there, be wild.
But yeah, that's like, I get how this could be a game. I don't know if it should even be one. He did kind of pin Sin's arms, but there is no way this is 3 games, and I would think this will get reduced at the tribunal.
No, it's either 3 or nothing.
Look, if this was 1 game, I would assume North would challenge it, but I wouldn't have that strong of an opinion either way. But 3 is fucking insane. Other good things for Port that I noted. Ollie Wines, despite not having high efficiency, I thought he kind of deserved more of the credit that Steele Steinbottom got the other day. Very useful at ground level in clearances, and like his clearances led to things happening. So I actually thought it was one of the better games from him after we had talked how many times about him kind of vanishing over the prior 2 years.
And great to just see him playing a week after issues with his atrial fibrillation, knowing that that's under control, that he can be back on the oval so quickly.
Again, I think at this point, that's just something that they're able to manage. And when it happens, both he and the club know how to handle it. And as much as we will give the entire Port Adelaide Football Club shit for that concussion thing a couple of years ago with Alir and Lockie Jones, I think it was, they have handled this really well. And, I think of it as sort of like, someone with allergies having an EpiPen, or I don't know, someone who gets who deals with seizures regularly or something, where it's like, it sucks and you don't want it to have to be a thing, but that the person with the condition can handle it and that the people around him know how to handle it is objectively good. Zach Butters, did you mention that he won the Peter Badco medal?
I did not, because I think we would have maybe seen it differently, but Butters did win that.
Yeah. 27 disposals, 13 tackles, and 30 pressure acts. And, I will say, and this was mentioned more in the lead up to the Anzac Day game, but sometimes the medal given out for Anzac Day is less about best player and, the guy who kind of embodies selflessness and sacrifice. Although I believe Butters did also get the maximum 10 coaches votes. I like Connor Rosie more. I think you did too. And we both really liked Sam Powell-Pepper.
That's Sam Pure Testosterone Powell-Pepper, who was exactly what this game needed when at times it ended up being quite boring. Another podcast, The Falcon, we've interacted with those guys a lot, said this is the wildest boring game they've seen.
I did not find this game boring.
They said that around 3/4 time, I believe. The 4th quarter definitely had some more interest in it, but Powell-Pepper can kind of be that circuit breaker.
Maybe I didn't see it as boring just because it was like, oh my God, North is hanging around. Whereas if you had, made this maybe 2 teams that were perceived to be on level footing, it wouldn't be that way. Also, another 11 tackles for Willem Drew, 7 for Jackson Mead. And yeah, the biggest, North did actually win on expected score. So it's just frustrating if you're North that you actually play a really good game. And the one thing you can always count on, Nick Larkey being accurate, was not there. And I'm sure there were a couple of people why couldn't you have done this against the Suns a couple years ago? Although, Colby McKercher did his part. The Colby McKercher, Harley Reid stuff is for another time, but it is funny. They did everything right except the one thing they can normally count on.
Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did. How did you know that number, Ethan? Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters. Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer, no fancy software needed. It's so easy you can edit it while drunk. And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more just like we do. Best of all, it's completely free. Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
And welcome back to episode 235 of Americans Watching the Footy. I'm Ethan Castle in South San Francisco. Follow me on Twitter at Castle Media.
Follow the executive producer, his son, Brian Harambe, on Instagram, a cat named Brian. I'm Benjamin Castle in San Diego, at BenjaminHK01 on Twitter. Collectively, we're at Americans Footy on multiple platforms.
Speaking of the executive producer, I think he wants back in.
Well, as Brian makes his case to be let back in to oversee this part of our recording again, I'll tell you that we had over 12,000 in Canberra to see the Giants 12-9-81 fall to the Bulldogs 17-11-113. It was such a comfortable win for the Bulldogs that they were able to take out Marcus Bontempelli at three-quarter time. He was his normal self. James Harms tying his career high with 4 goals. Joel Frazier continuing his hot form. Just most things that could go right for the Bulldogs did, especially from the second quarter onward. Where they really blew it out was the third. It was only a 5-point game at halftime, but then 5-3 behind in the third. And it happened really quickly. From their first 7 inside 50 entries of the third quarter, the Dogs scored 4-2.
The first half of this game was one of the most fun halves we've had all year, and then GWS just kind of said, nope, I'm out. The Dogs only went into halftime with the lead because of a Tim English goal after the siren, and then they really never looked back. That came after Toby Green kind of whiffed on a really easy one that I'm sure is one of the clangers of the week, where like Jason Johansson did his part to get in the way, but Toby totally whiffed on what should have been an easy goal. And anyway, it was a back and forth game, and you're thinking, all right, a moment like that could end up looming really large in what should be a close finish, and then it was not close. My first observation about this game wasn't really something pertaining specifically to either of these teams. It was just more a footy observation in general. And it's that I think the best way to win a matchup with like Sam Taylor or any other top key defender is to just run around as much as you can to either confuse them and break away from them or just tire them out. I noticed a couple of different Bulldogs forwards doing that, Riley West included. Super impressed with Joel Frazier once again, and Ed Richards looked as good as he did late last year, and combine that with, it wasn't a generational, like, oh my God, Marcus Bontempelli is the best player ever type of game, whereas he had those moments in his first game of the year, but he did a bunch of little things, like a couple of little knock-ons and things that don't show up on the stat sheet to go with not getting completely shut down by Toby Bedford, who is one of the best taggers out there. James Harms is apparently a good forward. Rory Lobb got thrown forward, which I thought was a really stupid decision, especially considering the GWS has Jesse Hogan, but it kind of worked. Early on, Hogan had been matched up with, I got to try to remember which defender who was way too small for the challenge, and then Luke Beveridge actually did a good job adjusting and switched that. I mean, it was like bad process and bad results, but it might have just been James O'Donnell, who like size-wise isn't that bad, but it was not the right matchup.
I think it was less switching up the matchups and just more seeing through the interference that Hogan and the others were trying to run, because that's something that we've seen Hogan do before. We saw it, for example, against the Saints in Gather Round. So it's more just sticking with your assignment a bit better.
Jed Busslinger finally got his debut at the expense of Liam Jones. That made no sense to me. He gave away a few frees, which debuts are tricky. You're adjusting to a new level. You're playing with a bunch of nerves. So I always give guys a pass in their debut unless they're like actively horrendous. And even then, I kind of give him a pass. He was not actively horrendous. You saw some promise. And I thought Buku Kamas defended really well. And then what really changed after halftime to me was that the two Baileys, Dale and Williams, really started like locking the ball in the forward half and giving the Dogs prolonged forward time. And that was a huge shift in how this game was being played.
Bailey Dale's best half of the season, definitely his best quarter, was the third. We know what he can do in just terms of being a longer, more accurate kick. He starts a lot of passages, but this was more of a contained job for him. And we saw the Brisbane Lions manage to do this a lot last year, where they were able to lock the ball in for so long that they kept their halfbacks there and just had them ready to rebound instantly while still being in the forward half. That was where Dale found himself multiple times, and that was part of those repeat entries and goals from the start of the second half.
And then Jason Johannesson just does a lot of glue guy stuff and makes a lot of hustle plays.
I'm so happy just any game he actually gets through.
Yeah, unfortunately, like I said, Kyle Oman did not. Zach Williams. We're starting to really build the whole glass bones, paper skin team out.
I was born with glass bones and paper skin.
And I'd love to eventually make an actual, make a chart of the 18 and then the 4 on the bench.
JJ is on there, of course, but he got through this one, so yay.
Really, the only negative I saw for the Dogs was Lockie Bramble, and then Josh Dolan was very quiet. And with Adam Treloar about to return, that seems like one of the guys who could go very quickly. Actually, those two both seem like it. Treloar's a test this week. Lockie McNeil's got a chance to come back. And then Nick Caulfield, I don't know if those guys could return through the twos, but there are still a couple of guys towards the bottom for the Dogs that could get taken out. I mean, I wouldn't personally hate if they just switched out Dolan for Riley Garcia, who I think did nothing to get dropped previously.
Dolan, Cooper Hines, the young guys are always the easy ones to give more time to develop.
And then again, Bramble's had one good game this year.
It was last week. Bramble was really on, and you were saying his phrases when you completely didn't expect it. But this was a back-to-earth game. I wouldn't drop him that quickly.
No, but he's another one that I would look at taking out at some point, especially with the young guys that can kind of do the stuff he does.
The thing that I just keep looking at for this game is just what prevented the Giants from keeping up in the second half. Yes, the Dogs were on, but it doesn't explain how things just got out of hand so quickly.
Well, look, I think the Bulldogs at their best might be the best. It's between them and the Lions and honestly maybe the Blues.
I mean, the Giants have had times like that too, though. So what gives? They didn't even allow a mark inside 50 in the first half.
And still went into halftime trailing. Now, maybe that was an omen, but I just thought this was set up to be a really tight game the whole way. This was the one tip I got wrong this round. I went 8 for 9.
I got this one because I knew about the Dogs' history and how well they did with this matchup in Canberra. It's their 4th straight win over the Giants there and 6th straight road win over GWS overall.
I hadn't really given much thought to that, and I should have.
I look a lot at Final Siren, looking at histories and things like that. This game did just feel odd, though, just for the fact that this is one of the Giants' bigger rivalries. You'd say it's their second biggest rivalry. The fact that this is the matchup that you send to Canberra felt off to me. And then also the fact that this game directly overlapped with the Brumbies.
Oh, this will be my chance to mention. I tweeted about this at one point because I think it was a try from the Queensland Reds. It was how can anyone watch rugby union and not say it is an objectively better watch than rugby league? Now, I understand there are socioeconomic differences and stuff that kind of led to league being more popular than union in Australia. And if you see rugby union as being too British, I love not wanting to be British. Maybe you should do away with, the King's birthday stuff too, and a few other things like the way you spell favorite and color. But as a sport, rugby union is so much more fun to watch.
Some of that we have long held, really, since the first time we watched league. It's just rugby union is the far superior game. I've been exposed to a lot more rugby union in person as well, which I really like. And I think it was a try between for the Reds against the Blues at Suncorp Stadium. Good seeing the Australian teams keeping up well in Super Rugby Pacific, and maybe that's just a sign that the Rebels have some things right on the field.
Ooh, you know what? This is it. This is the time.
Is this also the part where we talk about the NRL? The Tigers won again, and this time it was a golden point.
Wait, do you know the song?
What song are you talking about? And it looks like it was golden point, but a 2-point win again, so I wonder if it was another penalty.
The song is literally called Tigers Won Again by Detroit rapper G-Mac Cash.
I hope they use it.
The The best thing, I think he did perform it before one of their games last year. The best thing about it is this is an evergreen song because I don't think there's a single player name drop. It's just like the Tigers won again, and, references like Comerica Park and like hitting home runs and striking guys out or something. It's like very generic lyrics. And he's done similar stuff for the Lions. I guess the best comparison is Marlins Will Soar, but in rap form. But yeah, everyone should listen to the song Tigers Won Again.
Marlins Will Soar, by the way, is by Scott Stapp.
So my NRL observations. We missed a Reese Walsh injury. He got hurt and is out like 6 weeks because of course he is. And it really poured during the Brisbane Broncos game against, I forget which Sydney team, who they beat easily.
That was the Bulldogs. By the way, everything's going to be at Suncorp this coming week. It's going to be Magic Round.
So Magic Round and Q-Clash?
Yes.
Wow. I hope Q-Clash doesn't get overshadowed. That's a concern.
It will, especially because the Broncos play on Sunday. So it's a 4:05 start for the Broncos against the Panthers. And then for the Lions, or really perhaps this week, it's more the Bears. It's a 7:20 start. So I doubt you'd be at both Lang Park and the Gabba.
Now, there will be a few, but that is unfortunate. And my other thing, their like pregame Anzac ceremony was similar to the AFL, except one of the guys in the ceremony before this Broncos game had one of the biggest butts I've ever seen. It was one of the guys in uniform in the ceremony, doing, I don't know if it was the color guard or the bugle, or I forget which thing, but it just reminded me of the teacher from Family Guy. Everyone has one. Mine just happens to be of a hot Brazilian woman. That was the pod when we talk about rugby league. So yeah, that game involved the Bulldogs, and so did this one. But GWS, my biggest concern with them right now is their forward structure. They actually won this game on expected score. Now, to be fair, the Bulldogs led on expected score midway through the fourth, and then GWS got some in garbage time. But like outside of Jesse Hogan, this thing is a concern, and you can't build the entire ship out of Jesse Hogan. Now, he's very good, but he didn't have his most accurate game, and just the other guys got Jake Stringer can't kick a goal to save his life.
And that's even funnier this week coming against the team with whom he won a flag.
Aaron Cadman just looks, trending towards being a bust. He might not keep that up. I have a feeling because of who their next couple opponents are, the Giants will win at least one of their next two games. They will either win the Derby this week against the Swans, or they will go to Cardunia and beat the Cats yet again. Minimum one of those. I was thinking of making some sort of silly bet, not involving anything extreme, but maybe since they're the orange team, I would have to eat a lot of orange chicken from Panda Express or something. I don't know.
Panda Express challenge like Waffle House?
No, maybe just I have to walk to Panda Express and get a plate that's like all orange chicken instead of like I usually get orange chicken, and then, maybe Kung Pao chicken and either like string bean chicken or Beijing beef or something. Positives for GWS. Lockie Ash, I thought was actually really good moving out of the back. Loved Darcy Jones. Kind of stretched the field well and set stuff up. Harvey Thomas looks good, and that's about it. Jacob Ware had quietly been really good in previous weeks and was not in this game.
Gold Coast Suns 17-15-117, defeating the Sydney Swans 12-7-79.
The mighty Sun.
The third quarter in this game deserves the Louis line.
Whoa! Where did that come from? Whoa!
The Suns matching their exact score line from the first half in the third quarter alone with 6 goals, 6 to 1 point. Were they helped along the way? Yes. Did it end up mattering in the end that they were helped? Not really. The game swung with clearances and pressure in addition to the umpiring, and the Swans got pissed, and it showed. This was Bailey Humphrey's best game of the year, and he got the coach's votes love. He got the perfect 10, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, but I mean, Ethan, you've been proven right playing the long game with believing in Humphrey, even though you didn't expect him to be contributing in the way that he has, especially in terms of his marking.
Yeah, I didn't think of him as really a midfield talent at all. Whereas others, I think, just didn't think of him as a talent at all. I actually thought maybe the best guy in this game was Jared Witz, who the numbers aren't anything special. 28 hitouts, 18 disposals. The 11 score involvements are nice. I just thought he was kind of a wall and took a couple of good marks. It's a shame that one of the marks he took, he ended up kicking straight into the post after, because I really liked how he had been playing. We've said with the Swans a bunch of times, or at least I have, that, when Grundy's on, they're on, and he was not. And they also tried Peter Laddams with ruck stuff, and they tried Hayden McLean, and really none of those things ended up creating all that much.
The Swans did lose a defender at halftime when Ben Patton went out, but I didn't think that sort of thing was a real omen. Apparently Swans players were not prepared for the kind of heat that they were going to get, because I think they said during the second quarter, 3 players when they came to the bench were dry retching, including their best, Chad Warner. But I gotta say, even though it didn't really show on the scoreboard, the Suns dominated a lot of the second quarter, and that was despite Matt Rowell not being involved. For the majority of the first half, if not the whole game, James Rowbottom regularly won contests versus Rowell, and yet the Suns found a different way to win. That is as big a positive as anything, that the Suns didn't need everyone firing on all cylinders to win this game, completely turned things around in the third quarter. Also, when it had been tougher to score to the left side, to the left of screen, the open end before that too.
Sydney actually led this game. I believe their largest lead was 26. Looking at your notes here, Isaac Heaney completely owned the first quarter, but then faded, whereas at least Chad Warner kept it up. I switched my tip from the Swans to the Suns when I saw Sydney's team decisions. Bringing Laddams and Patton in and taking out Joel Hamling is fine, but you took out Sam Wicks, who's been like one of your best defenders all year.
That felt like an overreaction, even though the Suns do tend taller up front.
You know who's smaller and kicked 4 goals? Bailey Humphrey. And you still have to deal with Ben Long. So I really did not like that move at all.
I kind of saw that coming as well. Oh, by the way, what was Chad Warner's fantasy score?
What was it?
119. Nice. But as the game went on and the Suns were winning with their depth, once again, the Swans' lack of midfield depth started showing. Remember who they do still have to come back. Callum Mills could be back in within a week or two, and that would be big going from the back. Another 2 to 3 for Taylor Adams coming back from his hamstring before he does yet another. Still at least a month, though, for both Hapley and Golden. So the grind will have to continue, and the Derby this week is of utmost importance.
I think Ollie Florent, who was really quiet in this game, really benefits from having Errol Golden out there. But I'm not completely buying on the Suns yet. I'm not quite to agnostic, like contemplating their legitimacy, but I'm definitely not like a Suns atheist.
We have to acknowledge the existence of the Gold Coast Suns, and they have moved to my I don't like you tier.
Simply because of the umpiring?
Because I completely understand how the league has coddled them, and also just some of the annoying things, like, for example, yes, I like Bailey Humphrey, but damn it, he uses Sweet Caroline.
Terrible song. Most of their goal songs are not good. Jed Walters' Call Me Maybe is good, and get used to that, because apparently he's now the new guy that gets every call. If the AFL starts like promoting him, I'm going to go full tinfoil hat on this. But yeah, this feels different than some of the Suns' other wins, even against a very badly injured team while the Suns are in great health, against an opponent that's still adjusting to its coach. Because again, they did this like without Rowell being that good. I thought Anderson was pretty good, but he wasn't amazing. Joel Jeffrey was kind of the one that did kind of what Jack Payne has done for the Lions in a couple of games, where, when they start to make their push and flip the game, he starts to push a little bit further up the ground and take higher and higher intercepts, and it kind of just everything else kind of like he keeps the heat on, basically.
Compared to Bailey Dale, where it was kind of similar, but Dale was doing more about getting the ball back in quickly, whereas Jeffrey, again, played more of that Jack Payne role there. What I will say about Jed Walter, he was also deathly quiet in the first half and then willed himself into the game by pushing into the wing and marking like a tall should. Learn something from that. Anyone. Eagles.
And then he got 2 calls his way to close the first half. The first one I didn't like on initial watch. After looking at the replay, it's a fine call where I think Nick Blakey did get him. And then there's a second one where like supposedly he was held by Lewis Melican. It was not a hold. And that's where things really started to shift. Even though the deficit was still 17 going into halftime, I think that had a carryover. Oh, also, you mentioned Ben Patton got subbed out at half, and he had actually been all right for what it's worth. I was aware that Tom Hanley got subbed in, but like you could have gone from Hanley getting subbed in at the start of the third quarter, like late in the fourth, and you have to check like, wait a minute, didn't Tom Hanley get subbed in?
Meanwhile, you look at the other sub, and it took a while for it to happen. Apparently, there was some sort of clerical error regarding the subbing in of Connor Butterick. So he was ready to go on, then Matt Rowell made an interchange instead, and all sorts of confusion. He ended up getting into the final few minutes for Ben Ainsworth, who you said could often be the barometer for this Suns team. 15 and 6 marks for Ainsworth, but nothing spectacular. Again, a different way for the Suns to win. Just unfortunate that it involved Neon as much as it did. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I would rather see Essendon win a final than the Gold Coast Suns.
I don't know about that. For the sake of memes, that would be really sad. Tell you what I liked about this game. Crowd was over 18,000. It didn't look like it, but I think it was just people staying out of the seats that were in direct sunlight. And it sounded like a crowd that was like 60 to 70% Suns fans instead of just Swans fans, and that is objectively good.
Well, they don't have another home game on the Gold Coast until May 31st against Frio, so enjoy it while it lasts. They do have the Darwin double coming up, and it's a tough double. The Dogs and Hawks. And those are also umpires' pets teams too, so we might just hear a lot of whistles up there in the top end.
I hope that they have a good crowd this coming week, show up at Brisbane. They did last year. Like, this is one of those games that could really help turn Q Clash into a real rivalry. Also, maybe if more people grab people's nuts.
I was waiting for somebody to talk about the swirl grip, and I wasn't sure if it would be near you. So, thank you for that. Carlton, 14-10-94, defeating Geelong, 12-4-76. I saw this result coming from multiple miles away. This is just a good matchup for the Blues in multiple ways. Separation came in the middle quarters, 9-5 in that stretch. But even though it was only a 1-point game at quarter time, I never felt really confident in Geelong, even when the Blues had to use their sub early because Zach Williams is Zach Williams.
I actually felt kind of good at quarter time as much as I did not like this matchup. I thought like, all right, Mark Blitzovs and Lawson Humphreys are the only ones that have really shown up, and this is a 1-point game. And I will maintain that Lawson Humphreys' first half was probably the best half a Geelong player has given this year. And without him, they would have been down 40, if not more. The way this game kind of went, on one hand, felt like how the Cats typically beat teams, not by having the best player necessarily, but by having just far more good players, which is usually what's been Carlton's undoing. And instead, in this game, it was Carlton's depth that was way better. And then it also felt like the way the Cats have run through Essendon at times, it felt like the Blues were kind of doing that. Where it's like, we're just going to take you right down the middle. We're bigger and stronger and faster than you, and you're not going to be able to tackle us or keep up with us in any way. And it was really frustrating between not just a bad matchup, but a bad game plan in a lot of senses, and just terrible performance, like kicking to nobody or just kicking right to Carlton players. 73 turnovers is just way too many. It was not a wet game. It was completely dry. But Bailey Smith, I forget who had tweeted it. It was like, no wonder he leads the league in meters gained. He just kind of lets it rip. He just kind of yeets it indiscriminately.
Bailey Smith and Rowan Marshall have a lot in common.
And it's frustrating because, like, in the second half, Smith was better, but he was still not great. And this is the sort of game that he needs to really deliver in. And, you would think after last year, it's like, all right, we were one midfielder away. Here's Bailey Smith. Now, to be fair, we weren't expecting Tanner Bruhn to do things, as is speculated. I don't know the details of your legal system and how like suppression orders and stuff work. But once again, feel like it's, always one midfielder away. A bad ruck matchup where I think they just kind of set themselves up for failure. As good as Reece Stanley had been the last few weeks, he was a bad matchup. Tom DeConing is just too big and strong for Reece Stanley.
Yes, Blitzos would have been the right matchup, but the question is, would you have just left Stanley out altogether despite his good form?
No, because he actually has utility elsewhere on the ground, and maybe in a forward line that struggled could have helped going to the forward 50. The forward line's been a pervasive issue. Really everyone other than Dangerfield, though I did like some things out of Tyson Stengel.
Yeah, Stengel actually ran some interference in the second half up against Jacob Weering. That was a nice change.
I think this could be his role going ahead. Sort of like last year when teams would deploy a small forward to annoy Tom Stewart. I would love to do that with Tyson Stengel. And considering you've got upcoming matchups against Aleer, Sam Taylor, like if he's not doing that to one of Sam Taylor or Jack Buckley in the GWS game, something's gone horribly wrong. Because I thought he actually did take a step forward and the effort was better. What's not good? A lot of things. Ollie Henry, who came in as the sub, and Daniel James Warren was going back and forth with him on Twitter. He was talking about how, yes, Henry's been bad, but he's important to the forward structure. And I think there is something to be said for that. He came in right after Ollie Wiltshire had made a really nice play, and Wiltshire totally gets a pass because, as I've said many times, debuts are hard, and playing in front of 67,000 people doesn't make it any easier as you're trying to adjust to playing with a new set of teammates, playing at a higher speed, different level of physicality. So Wiltshire totally gets a pass, and I would not have subbed him out, but he had like a really nice kick out of the middle where he'd gotten into open space and immediately comes to the bench and gets subbed out, where I'm sure they had filed the sub paperwork before. And then, that happens. And I'm sure, the coaches all look at each other like, really? Right as he's starting to figure it out?
I totally called, by the way, that Ollie Henry would be the sub. I asked for it even last week before I knew that Wiltshire would be in the first place. Now I'm not sure really what to do going forward. Look at the things that have been done in the VFL. I know Pokingord's kept up with his goal kicking, so maybe there's something there, but I'm not sure how quickly you want to make these sorts of changes. But I'm not optimistic for Geelong about this Collingwood matchup coming up.
I don't think anyone is, although I do think we actually match up with them better than we match up with Carlton for what that's worth. But if it's going to be one of those slow kick mark games, which Carlton did late in the game, it's not going to be fun. If you fall behind against a team that can really control the pace and bleed things out, you're in deep shit. And Ollie Henry right now reminds me of Cam Newton in Super Bowl 50, where he fumbles and then he sees the Broncos player diving for the ball and he just backs away like, nope, I want nothing to do with this. It's the sort of thing that makes you really wish there was a mid-season trade period or just, a trade deadline, because I can think of someone who's the exact same height that right now isn't getting games on a really good team that would fill the role really well and is good at ground level
And has done particularly well against Collingwood.
And that's Callum Brown.
Un, dos, tres, cuatro!
Now, I will say, Ollie Henry has also gotten up for Collingwood, but
I don't see it happening again. When you think about Ollie Henry against Collingwood, you see him getting run down by Darcy Moore.
he was not good, and there were far bigger problems. Jai Clark, on one hand, he is only 20 years old. On the other, there is no way he should have been brought in for Ted Closey. And I think at this point, the idea of him being the next Joel Selwood can completely go away, because at age 20, Selwood was averaging 25 disposals a game. If Jai Clark is the next Joel Selwood, I'm the next Ryan Reynolds.
Oh, I was going to say I'm going to be elected Pope.
So my thing with Jai Clark, because he's only 20, he could still be a very solid player and have a very nice career. But I don't think this guy's ever, going to be in the conversation to win a Brownlow or a Cargie Greaves or anything. And right now, he is not the player that this team needs. O'Sheen Mullen was just horrendous and really made you question why he's in there.
Or Geelong preparing for a wet weather game or something.
I don't
I'm like,
know. Because he's wet games, and so is Mark O'Connor, whose kicking accuracy was like it was a wet game. O'Connor was really bad, and that you had these guys in there and that neither of them were tagging.
O'Connor's one function at this point is to tag. I can't see him keeping up, his good stretch to start the season on the halfback flank. I see that as a flash in the pan, and just here's the part where Geelong's lack of depth is really catching up to them.
I don't think it's so much a lack of depth. There are a lot of injuries right now and just a couple of poor lineup choices. But the only thing that should save one of Mullen or O'Connor this week, and I'd rather it be O'Connor that stays in, is needing someone to tag Nick Dacos.
Nah, how about you just don't tag Nick Dacos? Ask Essendon how that went.
And then there's Jack Bowes, who had a really, really good game in kind of a defensive, sort of half mid, half back role a week ago. And then they took him out of that, had him in the middle, and there was one where he got bumped by George Hewitt really as a ruck contest was starting, and he just lay there on the ground and let the play happen without getting involved, despite not really being injured at all. And that just can't happen, and I would like to see other people in there instead of him. But yeah, that he was in the wrong spot, that you had the Stanley matchup with Tom DeConing and didn't do it where this team in past games at times has accepted, and they did this a lot with Sam DeConing rucking last year. It's all right, we're not going to get the hit out, but we can be second to the ball and get an immediate tackle and win possession. And there was no interest in doing that. And they played Max Holmes kind of in a off-ball, half-back flank wing role when he could have been in the middle helping to get clearances. And I mean, they threw Tyson Stengel in the middle, which helped some going into the second half. But this was not a well-played, well-coached, or well-umpired game.
Here we go with this part. It was about time for it to happen. We always ask what is holding the ball. Now we have to ask what is holding the ball for the Hollins brothers, and what is holding the ball for Carlton, and what is holding the ball for Geelong, because timing has confused me a lot. I also thought Geelong were lucky with some of the things last week too, and now I'm
first quarter. This is how it works. They get calls in the first quarter, people get all mad, and then they get none for the rest of the game. Last week after the first quarter, free kicks were 17-4 Hawthorn. This week they were 16-4 Carlton. Tom Atkins had 14 tackles in this game. How many free kicks did he have? 2.
They were probably both of the first quarter.
Tom Atkins can restrain a guy for 3 to 5 seconds. Nothing. But someone grabs him or Sean Manna for half a second. That's ball. And that just got way out of hand.
I will go back through this game and literally go through these holding the ball calls ahead of next week's episode and figure out if there are common threads there other than who has the ball in terms of fire opportunity, place on the oval, anything.
For the record, I did not think Atkins was near as good as he had been in prior weeks. He still got to 14 tackles, but it's as much as I love Tom Atkins, as much as I think very highly of him, you should not be building your team off of the hopes that he goes and plays out of his mind. He's a great core depth guy. He's basically a captain without being a captain, but skill and talent-wise, he's limited. And even though he plays above his skill and talent level, you can't be expecting him to go out there and be the best player and win you games.
What moves would you have made? There, you're Chris Scott now.
Well, I get that if Jake Kolajashny maybe wasn't available yet, but I would have liked to see Mitch Duncan probably over, I guess, Mullen, and I would have kept Close in over Clark. And then this coming week, yeah, I definitely would like to see those changes. I'd like to see Jake Kolajashny now that he's got a VFL game. I haven't watched enough VFL to tell you if Jay Polkinghorne is ready yet, but I'd at least kind of give him the side eye. Obviously, if Brian's ready, get him in. The problem is there are probably 5 or 6 players to take out and only 3 or 4 to bring in unless Jack Henry is ready to go. Tom Stewart staying in after suffering an early hit to the knee was surprising, and he was clearly limited, but Chris Scott did say post-game that, yeah, he was sore, but, we wouldn't leave a guy out there if it jeopardized their chance to play the next week. And Stewart stayed in and played through the pain, and I give him a lot of credit for that, even though he did not play that well. It was definitely better than the alternative. I'm terrified of the thought that we wouldn't have had a sub to exercise later in the game, even though I think we subbed the wrong guy. Just thinking about suffering through that performance from Mullen and that performance from Bowes and that performance from O'Connor with the knowledge of oh God, we don't have anyone else we can bring in. Yeah, I would have taken Mullen or Clark out. Let's talk about Carlton, who finally won a game against a competent team. This is the first time since round 15 last year they did that, because their final 3 wins last year were over Richmond, North, and West Coast, and their first 2 wins this year were West Coast and North.
Is it time to also say Geelong doesn't count? No, I
thought this version of Geelong was bad.
I don't buy that idea at all. No, this was a game that the Blues thoroughly deserved to win, and they did.
And they give it in a very un-Carlton way.
Well, a lot of it was self-inflicted by Geelong again. However, this was the best game for Carlton's depth. We were wondering, okay, what is Nick Haynes really going to bring in defense? Is he really going to be getting steady time? Not only is he getting steady time, he was, I think, accurately given the most coaches' votes in this game. Mitch McGovern had started the season quite poorly as well. He's totally stabilized now. He's gotten his power back from the Monstars in terms of his ball movement at the very least, and studded marks and 9 intercepts for him as well.
Jack Silvani, despite breaking a bone in his hand when he decided to hit Patrick Dangerfield, and I didn't think he even hit him that hard, has been very good. Now Silvani's going to be sidelined, but Wiedering was not that good, still kind of limited by injury, and Tyson Stengel did a good job on him, and the rest of Carlton's defense was able to step up in spite of that, which is very rare. I think it was Nick Negrapontis or one of the other good Carlton analysis podcast people we follow saying how this team's bad stretches under Voss tend to be 4 to 5 games, and they've moved past that. They did that by beating a couple of shit teams, but now they've gone out and beaten someone better. And it reminds me of the Lions last year, just in terms of, they got their confidence and swagger back by beating bad teams and then parlayed that into beating better teams. And again, I'm not comparing them to last year's Lions on a talent level or anything. I'm not saying this is a team that's going to go the whole way, but how they were able to generate momentum off of beating teams at the bottom was similar.
Negrapontis did note that this was the first time since the first week of July last year that the Blues had all of Charlie Curnow, Harry Mackay, Tom DeConing, and Jacob Wiedering fully healthy in the game. And we're talking about another depth thing. Matt Harrell had an excellent fourth quarter, easily his best quarter so far in the AFL. Just small sorts of plays that made a difference.
Matthew Cottrell as well had a big fourth quarter. And then you had the kind of obvious, Tom DeConing usually plays the Cats really well. I mean, he's played everyone well this year, but these guys have lost games when he's been great. Look back at round 1. Sam Walsh, I thought, was their best midfielder in this game. George Hewitt did lift late, but over the full game, it was Walsh. Both the Hollins brothers were good, despite the extra help they got. Adam Scherer was solid. And of course, playing your former team, you're going to go off. And Lockie Fogarty had a pretty good game. And then Harry Mackay actually kicking straight and taking pretty much every mark in his direction. And that's the end result.
Great for Harry Mackay. I would love it even more if he were anything but a Blue or a Hawk or maybe a Docker. But he's back. He didn't need to help this game. 3 straight from 19, 10 contested, and 8 score involvements from him. I love it when a player is able to overcome their own struggles. Considering how open he's been about his mental health struggles and being myself somebody who's struggled with a lot of that myself, it was just refreshing, at least in hindsight, to realize, oh, wait, wow, this is the first time that we've really seen Harry being back. So that's something to take away from this game.
I have hardly watched the finale of this round. I had it on in the background for the second half, and I will give you my recap of what I could tell just based off of other people's tweets, and then let you do the rest. It was Hawthorn 18-16, 124, defeating West Coast 11-8, 74 over at Marvel. Hawthorn fans did not seem pleased with the 2-8 they kicked in the first quarter or the way they kind of let their foot off the gas late, but they did enough in the middle to make this comfortable. I think Hawthorn fans are aware that that's probably not a performance that's going to be good enough against better teams. Also, remember they're without both Will Day and Connor Nash. And Benjamin, you take it from here because that's really all I know about this game.
The fact that Hawthorn had that late surge, getting 3 goals in the final 3.5 minutes of clock time, made the score more accurately reflect the way the game had been. Because this should have been a 30 or 40 point game at quarter time rather than 7. I'm looking for the expected score stuff for the round, and the Herald Sun has it as actually being relatively close, 137-75, relatively close to what actually happened. But this felt like it should have been blown way further out.
I found it through AFLX scores. Blue Sky. The only time I ever look at Blue Sky when they don't tweet stuff.
Yeah.
Looks like if there was, including the 1 point from a rushed behind, 132.6 to 72.5.
Yeah. So, both kind of close to where the game actually ended up. And it was the late things that it was the late goals at the very end from Bobby Orchol, Connor McDonald, and Jack Ginnivan doing that. Compasses were a bit off for a couple people in this game. Again, Jack Dunstan with some struggles again. Connor McDonald couldn't kick anything for a while, but the Hawks were going to win this game no matter what. It was a question of by how much, and they did themselves no favors early. The Eagles did them favors late. I am glad that there were different looks for West Coast in this game, though. That started from the very beginning. We did see a steadier on-ball roll again for Harley Reid and Jack Hutchinson, but they were joined by Brady Hoff. And from this game, I didn't mind it just to see what they could do. But as the game went on, I started thinking, wait a minute, why is Hoff not playing on Nick Watson? Now, if you're trying to see what Hoff's motor is like and maybe you're gearing him up to play on Kazi Pickett next week, then I would get the long game you're playing there. I just now need to see Hoff playing on Kazi constantly. He's a decent enough disposal. Ended up with 6 tackles, 23 disposals at 60% this week.
Well, what was the contested and uncontested split? Because that's always something I look at in conjunction with disposal efficiency.
It was mostly uncontested.
All right, so 60% is not great then.
No, it's not. But again, this was his very first game in a steady center role. We've seen him on the wing, but not in the center square. Eagles, though, were not clean from the middle, though. Hutchinson was around 42%.
Is he Loosh or who's Loosh?
Isn't that Jake? That's Jake Waterman.
Why?
Apparently, Loosh is short for Evolution, which is a Brendan Favola thing. I think this goes way back.
Okay, because I was thinking of Nuke Lelouch from the overrated movie Bull Durham. There's a hot take for you. I've heard nothing so far about any issue with Jeremy McGovern laying Nick Watson out.
It was a little after the play. I didn't think it was that big a deal. There wasn't a need to sell it at all. It happened.
I was kind of disappointed he helped him up after instead of standing over him. I mean, I guess standing over someone when you're getting your ass kicked wouldn't have been a great look, similar to Constanti with the Blues fans.
No, what you do is when you're already leading a game and then you take a hanger over a guy who's a foot taller than you, you then hit the too small on him once you kick your goal.
I was going to save that for Mark of the Week discussion, but I'll mention that.
I wanted to mention it here because the Eagles played Corey Durden into form. The Eagles can kind of play anybody into form.
I mean, if O'Sheen Mullen's still on the team in a few weeks, we could have a stoppable force against a movable object.
The Cats are beating the Eagles, Ethan.
I know, but would they play O'Sheen Mullen into form? Highly unlikely. And still, just being a trip to Perth, I don't love that, but it will be nice to have that game after a bunch of really tough ones. Oh, and then Nick Watson getting run over reminded me that apparently it's okay. I didn't get into great detail other than the different definition of holding the ball, but Nick Haynes running over Jack Bowes in a marking contest and Jeremy Cameron getting completely run over by Mitch McGovern, both of those things were fine. And yet O'Sheen Mullen's one good contribution, a great chase down tackle on Harry Mackay, was called a push in the back. Did umpiring even come up at all in this game?
I mean, it didn't really end up mattering. The umpiring wasn't my focus at all. No, the reason this was my least favorite day of footy was just because you went into it knowing that Hawthorn were going to win this game, and it didn't feel like a really fulfilling win for Hawthorn. Yes, they got 24 free kicks to the Eagles 11, but West Coast are sloppy, and a lot of the guys who make those plays are young, so it's not a real surprise when Harley Reid gives up 6 free kicks, or Brady Hoff gives up 3 when it's his first game playing full-time midfield. So that wasn't really an issue. Issues for me, defense other than Jeremy McGovern. I don't get how Bobby Orchol just keeps getting space. Liam Duggan, absolutely useless in defense. I was ready to go Rodney Eade on Will Minson on Liam Duggan, and apparently Ethan had never heard of that Rodney Eade thing before. But no, in the first quarter, I noted 3 different things where where I'd just be ready to absolutely cook Liam Duggan for it. The Eagles have the most useless captains in the AFL. Between Duggan and Oscar Allen being so ineffective forward that now he's having to play back and isn't doing well there either. I would have left them both in Victoria to just fuck off for the rest of the year. Allen could just stay in that same part of the Oval when he might join Hawthorn anyway. Like, it's a damn shame that Jeremy McGovern wasn't named captain all along.
Which is funny because not that long ago, we were like, hell yeah, Oscar Allen, great captain, great pick.
That was at the start of the 2024 season.
That's not that long ago is the thing.
It's been over a year. A hell of a lot can change. He's good as gone to me. There was a bit of life in the fourth quarter, I'll say, with my hopeful Triple H midfield look of Harley, Hutch, and Hewitt all doing something good. Harley Reid did get on the end of a couple follow-up stuff from Hewitt. And look, we know what Harley Reid can do in the front half. I just want him to have a more visible effort in defense as well. And then I still insist, Liam Ryan should be in the leadership group. 3-1 from 7, 6 tackles. He's the one guy in the forward half that you constantly know is always giving at least one damn. And I want him to keep feeling like he has some real responsibility. And I think a leadership role would be the way to do that.
Weren't you questioning his efforts not that long ago, like last season?
That was last season.
And if you overreact to all these things and make changes so quickly, that just breeds instability. Now, I get the frustration with Oscar Allen, but some of the others, I think, there's a balance between being too patient and overreacting.
I think this week's selection is going to be very telling because the Waffle side played early in the week, and so you couldn't really make changes after that. You're not going to have guys go cross-country and play another game. Not even sure if that's allowed to play more than a half in the reserves and then play in the senior side as well. But Tom Gross should be back in. There's a question about whether maybe Job Shanahan could get his debut at this point. Maybe you could even give Archer Reed a rest or another game down in the twos to try and sort things out. I just hope that Jack Williams isn't dropped because I actually like what he contributes as a contested mark up front as well. And I like Archer, but, this is a growth period. I just don't think there's any use in dropping Jack Williams to the twos.
I have 2 questions. Number 1, does Malachi Champion have a shot at playing anytime soon? Because his name is cool.
I mean, he had 2 goals in round 3 against Perth, but didn't find the scoreboard against Claremont. Did win 5 free kicks, though, in round 4. So there's that.
And number 2, is Matthew Owies as bad as everyone's saying?
I'm infuriated by the fact that Owies was traded for. I'll say that. I mean, there's that whole absolute mess there. I mean, it's not like Owies gets a whole lot of opportunities. I will say he did finish one this game. He was 1-1 from 10. He was not the most objectionable player for me in this game. That was Duggan and Tyrell Dewar just because of his poor kicking. Is it awards time?
Yes.
Let's start with Mark of the Week, where we had that Corey Durden one with the leg in Sam DeConing's back, and he hit the too small afterward. I guess it's better to hit the too small than the too big.
And again, I will never be accused of being a Carlton fan. I have so much love and respect for anyone willing to hit the too small after scoring on a guy a foot taller than them. That is awesome. You have a good sense of humor, and I like you.
And then we had 2 marks from Mommy or Chol. One against Oscar Allen and one against Lloyd Meek. It's been a while since we had 2 marks from one player, the nominees of the same week. That's a Liam Ryan type thing there. I think Liam Ryan had it and Harry Himmelberg had it where they had 2 nominees for Mark of the Year on Brownlow night. I take Durden, by the way.
I do too, but having marks listed as Moppy or Chol 1 and Moppy or Chol 2 makes me think of 2 things.
Ariaga 2.
I wasn't even thinking of that. I was thinking of another Simpsons thing, specifically Diablo Canyon 2. Why can't you be more like Diablo Canyon 1? And the LPGA golfer Lee Jong-un 6, not to be confused with the other 5 Lee Jong-un.
And I believe Lee 6 has won a major, which is why they're in our conscience for that. Before we go to Goal of the Week, I just want to mention that we found out a bit before recording that Peter Masusto died at age 67. He was a 2-time Premiership player for Carlton and won both Mark of the Year and Goal of the Year in 1981. Only he and Michael Mitchell in 1990 have done that. if there's anyone to do it these days, Shea Bolton,
Yeah, him or I guess Liam Ryan or Kazi would be possible.
Ollie Dempsey in a perfect world.
I see him as much more likely for mark than goal, but maybe. I'll have to keep thinking about this. I could see like a Zach Bailey or someone do it. Goal of the week, round 6 was Patrick Cripps picking up a Sam Walsh handball and kicking a running snap. I think I liked one of the others better.
Yeah, from his cousin Jamie, but Carlton wins because Carlton. They ought to win. Mark this week.
They definitely should win this week.
It would be the second straight win for Corey Durden, which would be pretty incredible.
Now, goal of the week this week, we've got Bobby Hill picking up in the back of the pack and snapping on his right, which was really the first time we noticed him after a very quiet first half. You've got George Wardlaw receiving a Nick Larkey handball and snapping on his right while going towards the right boundary. And you've got James Harms picking up the ball that Marcus Bonampelli dropped, faking Connor Iden, and then snapping on his right while going towards the boundary.
All right snaps, all around the boundary, all good kicks. I think Hill might have been the toughest of the kicks. Wardlaw was the longest, and Harms did the most to create the play. And so I'm giving my vote to James Harms.
I'm actually going George Wardlaw. I'm going to go Wardlaw 1, then Harms in 2nd, and then Hill in 3rd, because I'm going off of the logic of what impressed me the most when I saw it live. Behind of the week. I think last week we got the behind of the year with Jeremy Cameron's, some people called it a scissor kick. I called it a one-time bicycle thingy that hit the post. This week's nominees, we've got Kalachi running onto an Oscar McInerney hit out, running along the goal line and stepping around Liam Stalker, but his snap went wide. We've got Zach Bailey picking up a Hugh McCluggage handball, sidestepping Dougal Howard, dodging Jimmy Webster, bouncing. And he probably could have run further into the goal square, and instead his check side kick was too narrow. And then we've got Ollie Wines bursting through a stoppage in the right pocket, trying a soccer but missing across the face. I think it's got to go Bailey as the best, then Archie, then Wines, even though Bailey's actual miss was kind of embarrassing after he did all this nice work to set it up. Whereas usually most of these behind of the week we've considered have been, like there's a lot to consider where it's like a really tough low percentage kick. Whereas this one, he had the room to make it higher percentage and didn't.
I'll give it Bailey over Archie as well. I had a little bit of a tougher time to decide, but this is another one where I felt like Bailey did more. Assist of the week. Nick Dacos won it last week with his pick on the overlap from McStay to set up Will Hoskin-Elliott. We had a tougher time finding the right one this week, but Lockie Fogarty had this nice check side cross to Harry Mackay in the fourth quarter, and Mackay marked that on second effort and finish. So the former Cap does it against Geelong.
Worst on round 6 by vote. Overwhelmingly, it went to James Sicily. We've got 2 nominees for this week. 1 in a win. We have yet to get a worst on round in a win. And we're not going to this week, but Charlie Cameron, those 4 behinds and some bad misses, that puts him in the conversation. But it's got to be O'Sheen Mullen to finish with 8 disposals and 5 free kicks against. And let's keep this going. Only 1 contested possession, and yet only 5 of his 8 disposals were effective, and 4 turnovers out of those 8 disposals. Champion Data rated him as a -2.
I think we've seen worse this year.
Yes, we saw someone a couple weeks ago that was like a -4, and I don't remember who that was off the top of my head. And I'm not going to look at that because we're going to wrap things up right now with our main character. Last week, it was Noah Balta.
Yeah, I mean, that one kind of wrote itself between being selected, playing well against Ben King, and the sentencing with the curfew that prevented him from playing this week, for example. Your winner for this week, we mentioned him earlier, for what he overcame, and then having his first big game back on a big occasion in front of a good crowd. Congratulations to Harry Mackay. As much as we can't stand Carlton, no malice here whatsoever. Just good to see Harry in form for on and off field reasons, because both have been struggles for him in the past couple years. And oh boy, our next AFL game after this is Essendon and North. We've gone over this already. It can be a good game. It could also end up being a sickos game. It could also end up being just a one-sided embarrassment. I want a North win.
I do too. I mean, I prefer Essendon out of the big 4. Maybe it would change if they were ever legitimately successful, but I also would rather see North win. And yeah,
I'm waiting for like one of those Also, Harry Sheasel over-the-shoulder handballs to set up like a Tom Powell launch or something like that. I hope Bailey Stock gets back in this week.
As I've said, my prediction, Essendon and North will defy expectations and actually be fun. And then Saints Dockers screams close but not exciting.
I mean, it's the Ross Lyon Cup. It is kind of built for that. Catch our reactions to that one way or another at Americans Footy on Twitter, maybe on Instagram as well, because there's always a possibility for memes, although not much is going to top the GWS win sign right now. Note that they have not since that sign came out.
They're going to win one of the next 2 games. I think, you know what? It's a couple weeks off. I'm going to say it now. If the Cats actually beat the Giants at home, I think the only thing to do would be to eat like a lot of orange chicken.
Maybe I join you in that endeavor. Wouldn't be the stupidest bet I've made.
No, you've made far, far dumber, and I am not doing that.
I am at BenjaminHK01 on Twitter.
I am Castle Media.
The executive producer is on Instagram at Cat Named Brian. Where is he, by the way, before we check out of here?
Right behind the laptop.
It's warm. He's warm. I'm cold, and I'm ready to go to bed. Good time of day.